lawnmower. The complaint from my friend is it'll start and it runs for a little bit and then it dies. I know what you're thinking because I'm thinking the same thing. That carburetor. So what we have today is a Honda Harmony HRM215. This is what we're working on. And who doesn't love a Honda? These things are awesome. So, what do you say? Should we see what we can do and get this thing running better? So do I. And joining us today is my son. So, maybe we'll just let him do all that work today. Because, you know, I am kind of lazy like that. Alright, so what do you say we get started here? First off, why don't we have Clinton go ahead and pull the air cover off, air filter. And I'll grab a couple of tools so we can be ready for that. Alright, so what's your next step? Pull that off. You got the breather hose. You want to go ahead and disconnect that. And let's bring you in for a little bit of a closer look at this carburetor. As you can see, that thing is quite dirty. That outside is pretty dirty, but that's pretty common for these lawnmowers because it throws the grass and the dirt up while you're cutting. So, alright, so let's get this going here. So, pull that gasket off, set that off to the side so it doesn't get lost. Alright, next step is he's going to pull this fuel line off. Alright, now that he's got that off, so let's go ahead and shut that fuel off. Keep that from dripping. Even though the tank was empty, there was a little bit left in that line. Alright, so the next step is going to be to pull the spring off. So you can try doing it with your fingers or you can use some needle nose pliers. Either way works. So now that that's off, you just kind of let that dangle there. And what's going to be your next step? Okay, go ahead and rotate that clockwise. And then that rod should pop right up. Sometimes it can be stubborn. There you go. Alright, so what is your next step that you're going to do here? What are you going to show everybody what's to do next?
So this won't come off, so I'm going to be taking off these two bolts so I can get it off.
The reason why he's doing that is this doesn't want to come off all the way. It gets jammed up, so you loosen that up and you can move everything with it. And now you should be able to pull the carburetor completely off. And then the governor rod comes right off with it. So that's how you take it off. Alright, now that the carburetor is ready for disassemble, why don't you go ahead and pull that bottom bolt off of the bowl. So we can get that bowl off there and get a look inside there and see just how dirty that is on the inside. How's that look inside there? Why don't you put it up to the camera so everybody can see. Bring it down a little bit. There are some nasties in there. You can see them right down in there. There's some more laying in here. So yeah, you got some nasties that got inside that carburetor. So before we actually go any further, let's grab a container. So why don't you go ahead and hold the carburetor over it, or I can do that as well. And what we're going to do is, there is all that dirt on there. Let's get that dirt off of there. We don't need all that getting inside that carburetor, so let's clean that off. Alright, that looks a lot better. So, the next step is going to be, go ahead and grab your needle nose pliers and go ahead and pull that pin out. Pull the pin out so you can pull the foot bowl and the needle out. Alright, float looks pretty good. Needle looks pretty good. I mean, considering the age, it's in really good shape here. So let's clean this out a little bit. And we'll stick some of these parts in there so we don't lose them. Let's take those off to the side. Alright. So, right down, we're going to pull this off, and right below it is going to be your low idle jet. And we're going to need to take that out. But before you just pull it out, the best thing to do is we're going to screw that in and see how far it goes in, so when we put it back in, we know where to set that back up. You don't want to just take it out and not know where to set it. So if you have one of these Hondas and you have a problem with it starting and dying right away, maybe run for a minute and then die, chances are it's your carburetor's dirty, and this is what you're going to need to do. If it's surging up and down, again, your carburetor's dirty, and this is also what you need to do, is disassemble it and clean it. Alright, now that he has that out, we're going to go ahead and we can pop this low idle jet out. You can stick a screwdriver in there. Sometimes you can just do it with your fingernail. And we're just going to put it in there and give it a little bit of a twist, and it should pop right up and out. It gets stuck in there. It's got an O-ring on it. So the O-ring still looks like it's in good shape. And there's that hole right there. That's one of the things you want to make sure is clear. You got another one on the end. You got to also make sure that that's nice and clean. So that's one of the steps we're going to do, is to cleaning this carburetor, is doing that. So the next step, that's pretty much everything you're going to need to take off. So let's get something else going on over here, looking like a mess. So let's slide this out of the way. And the next step we're going to do is we're going to get all these boogers, all this nasty stuff. See all that? It's all flaky. That all needs to come off. And it comes off easy. You rub it with your fingers. You know, you can take some carb cleaner, something, and you can get that off. So the next step is going to be here is we want to get this main jet out. Right down inside of here is the main jet. So if you want to stick the screwdriver in there, get it in there, push down, and give it a good turn, and it'll loosen it up. We're going to take that jet all the way out. That is your main jet. So let's go ahead and put this back over here. We'll just keep it. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and try tapping it down on the towel? Because sometimes, there you go. He had it out, it was stuck in there. Alright, above this main jet is what's called an emulsion tube. That is your main jet, and you can look in there, and you can't see it, but I cannot even see daylight through it. You cannot see no light through it. So that thing is clogged. That's bad. So we'll get that cleaned out. But just on the other side of that is an emulsion tube. And can't really see it, but inside there is a little brass emulsion tube sticking up here. So we need to get that out of there. So the next step would be, and I'll see if I can do this one, is a screwdriver in there. And it didn't even need it. It was already loose. It just slid right out. So this is your emulsion, what's called an emulsion tube. And on this emulsion tube, as you can see, there's a hole right there. What you might not be able to see is all these little holes. You can see a little bit through some of them, but they need to be cleaned. If they're not completely cleaned, that's not going to get fuel up into that carburetor properly. So what do we say we grab the torch tip cleaners and we'll just get that all cleaned out. Alright, at this point he's going to use the torch tip cleaners and clean out the main jet and clear that out, because like I said, you couldn't even see daylight through it. So let's get that done. And as you can see, he's got the torch tip cleaner going through it, so that's nice and clean. So go ahead and be done with that. Grab the WD-40 and we're going to spray a little bit through that jet to make sure that it comes out. Shoot it in, it should shoot out the other side. And you can just see that it just squirted out, so that's good and clean. So his next step will be to clean my workbench. Thank you. Alright, emulsion tube. We got to make sure that we can see through all those holes. So you can use a torch tip cleaner, and we're going to clean that out again. Okay, work down here so they can see. Let's clean that emulsion tube. So he's going to feed that same torch tip cleaner wire in through the holes and get that through and make sure that they're all nice and clean. Alright, and once those are nice and clean, you got some other ones that are down here. And they're quite small. There's like 4 here, 3 here, you know. It's torch tip cleaner wires are a little bit too much for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick the WD-40 in the end of the emulsion tube. And we're going to put our finger over the other end. And we're going to spray. And it comes out of each hose. I know it comes out foamy, it's hard to see. But those are nice and clean. So we're not going to worry about cleaning those. They're nice and clean. So the next step is going to be grab the carburetor, and his next step is going to be he's going to shoot some WD-40 through each of these holes to make sure that everything's nice and clean, along with this one in here. So why don't you go ahead and do that. Shoot some WD-40 into these holes with all the open holes that you can find. And shoots out the other side. I can see it in there. So go ahead and shoot some more into that one. And see where it comes out. And it comes out right over here. Where it comes out is, I'll put it up here so you can see it. So go ahead and shoot it in that hole again. Where we took out the low idle jet is where you're going to see it come out. So that's nice and clean. So now you got this one. So go ahead and shoot some in there. See where it comes out. And it will spray it on the inside. So that's nice and clean as well. So now we got that done. Let's grab a clean rag and you can wipe all that down. So why don't you go ahead and wipe the carburetor down so it's nice and clean. Alright, that should be good. Alright, next step is going to be, is you still got these nasties all over here. So why don't you take a wire brush and just kind of wipe that down. And just all this right here. Get all that off so it's nice and clean. Alright, that looks good. Now, go ahead and take some WD-40 and just spray it all around on there to get all that nice and cleaned out. And why don't we go ahead and spray the float down. Grab a clean rag. Go ahead and set the float on the clean rag. Now that all these parts are clean, let's get those on a clean one. We'll move all this dirtiness out of the way. Alright, so his next step is going to be his reassemble. So he's going to go ahead and pick the carburetor up. And the first step is going to be to put the emulsion tube back in. Now, as you can see, there's a small end and then the wider end. The small end, when you put it in, will stick out through the hole there. I know it's dark, you can't see, but it'll stick in there. So you have to shove this small end in first. So you want to go ahead and shove that in there.
Which part?
Here it goes, right back in there. Alright. Now you can grab your main jet, put that in there, and screw it back in until it's snug. And when you're doing this, especially when you're taking it out, you want to be careful because that main jet is only made of brass and it can be stripped very hard or very easily. And so you want to be careful with that. Otherwise you're going to end up replacing it. Alright, so you got that in there. You want to try it one more time. Just give it one more good snug. You don't want to go too tight, but you want to make sure it doesn't come loose. Give it a little snug. Alright, so now you can take your float and put that back on. And you want to get that needle back in where it goes. And you want to go ahead and throw your float pin back in. While he's doing that, I'm cleaning the float bowl out real good. Or the carburetor bowl, I should say. Get those nasties out that were in there. Got a little bit of rust in there that won't come out, but that's okay. Alright, so as you see, the bowl has a dump drain over here. So when you put this back on, what you want to do is the carburetor goes back on this way. So this part is facing you. So when you put it back on, what you want to do is you want to have, so this is off to the side a little bit so you can get to that. Because when you go to put it away for the season, you drain this out. And you pop that out, it drains the gas out of the carburetor. That's great for storage. So why don't you go ahead, put that bolt back in, give it a snug it back up. Alright, so for your next step, what are you going to do now?
I'm going to put the low idle back in.
Okay, is there a certain way it goes in, or can you just put it in any way?
The flat part has to be facing towards it.
Okay, why don't you bring it up a little closer and show the people what it is you're talking about?
So this part has to be facing that little edge right there.
Okay, so that flat part goes against the back of the carburetor. Awesome. Is that so if it's not down like that, you put the rounded end part there, you're not going to be able to get that screw back in?
Yeah.
Awesome. Go. Nope, the other way. All right, so that's 3, so that's good. All right, so what is the next step for us to do? I believe our next step is to put that carburetor back on the lawnmower, and then we'll check it out and see how it runs. So, all right, he's got the carburetor in hand. He's got the governor rod into the carburetor, the proper hole. Now, why don't you go ahead and put that rod back into the governor arm? Okay, now that it's in there, give it a little turn like that. There you go. And at the same time as you're bringing it over this way, you should be able to line up the carburetor. And this should fall right into place. And there you go. Slide the carburetor on. Alright, so what's your next step?
Putting this back on.
Okay, you want to do that next? Alright, you can do that. So, I believe I have your other bolt over here. Alright, you really should do this by hand to tighten them. But if you want, you can go ahead and use the little impact. Just don't give it too many ooga doogas. Just give it so it's till it stops. Too many ooga doogas, you'll break something. All right. Now that that's on, what's the next step? All right. So for the next, he's gonna pull this back, and you're gonna put this back on. You can put this rod back on. Might need to slide the carburetor off a little bit more to give it a good, so it lines up good. And sometimes, there you go. Sometimes they're a little tough to get back in. So go ahead and grab that spring. And sometimes with that spring, it's a little easier to grab it with the needle nose pliers, so you can actually see what you're doing. Because otherwise, that hole that spring goes into, that hole is real tiny. And if you're doing this one, you'll see that it's real tiny, and it can be kind of a pain to put in. All right, I believe the next step you have is putting that fuel line back on. You want to get that slid back on. And again, it might be easier to grab that line with the pliers. Or not. And get that clamp slid back over it. Get that back into place. For his next magic trick, we're going to put that air filter box back on. And why don't you go ahead and grab that box, or grab that gasket. Almost forgot about that. And this gasket only goes on one way. Why don't you show them the hose? On the carburetor, there's a hole here. And the gasket he has, bring it up a little so they can show them. You can see the hole here. We need to make sure that hole lines up with this hole right here. So why don't you go ahead and put that on? Because it really only goes on one way. But knowing those two holes need to line up makes it easier. Alright, grab your air filter box. And we'll make sure we get this hose hooked back up to it. And before we put that on, this thing is dirty. So why don't you stand by? I'm going to clean it. And when we come back, he's going to put this on. And what he's doing on the back side is you got to make sure you put that hose back on. Okay, you can get these nuts started on there. So how many of you get the luxury of having your sons or daughters working with you on this stuff out in the garage? It's one of the greatest things, feelings you can have. Alright, got those started. You got, I believe there's one more that goes on the back side, isn't there? Yeah. Okay. And again, you should do this by hand. But if you trust yourself that you can do it with the impact without too many ooga doogas and not break anything, you can. Or we could do it by hand with a ratchet. Just kind of zip them in. Alright. That air filter is pretty dirty. This video is just on the carburetor. We will be tuning this thing up again, or tuning it up. That's going to be another video. So why don't you go ahead and grab that air filter. Throw that back on. So now it's full of gas. Alright, you can turn that fuel on. Alright, so what we're going to do next is we're going to start this thing up. Alright, so the back pedal, you're going to step on that, but don't push it all the way down or it slams down fast. Just kind of ease it down. Good idea. Helps take the safety bar out. And this lift table, I got this thing from Harbor Freight. It's a 1,000-pound motorcycle lift table. This thing works awesome for lawnmowers and snow blowers. I absolutely just love this thing. I've had it a few months now, and it just works great. I'm no longer sitting down working on the floor. I now have the luxury of it working right up at the proper height. Alright, so go ahead and step on it. Give it a yank. A success. Well, I'll have to take it outside. I'll let it run for a few minutes, including with the blade running. So, other than that, I think he did a great job. This thing seems to be sounding good. So, with that said, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video where we tune it up.